Many years ago, I was taking this amazing class on ceramic sculpture, which means there's no electronics for you to do your sculptures. It's all hand-built techniques. It's a wonderful class. And I was making this, what I thought was a beautiful sculpture, about probably the biggest sculpture I've ever made in ceramics, about yay big, and it was a flower design. It was like a flower. And this flower is like this tubular shape, and it ends in a point. Now, I wanted to make different layers of the same sculpture. One going this way, one going that way. Very creative. What happens? I bring the inside piece of this sculpture, bring it to my teacher, and she says, Angel, this looks just like the first piece you made. I'm like, yes, it's supposed to go inside. And she says, but why don't you make maybe it a little bit different? And I said, no, I want this one to look like the other one, but going this way. And she looks at me, Angel, you need to be flexible. I said, no, this was the design that I just dreamed. And she looks at me again, she says, okay, I understand that. That's okay. She goes away. I'm going to the kiln to check on some things. When I come back, she calls me and she has her hand behind her. This lady had a paddle in her hand and she beat the hell out of my sculpture. And she changed the shape of it somewhat. There was no way back because the clay had already been stretched. So what happens? She says, okay, now I'm gonna go. See what you can do with that. Oh, the things that I would have done to that teacher. But she left, and I was very, very upset, and I just decided to shape it. And I shaped it in some weird shapes, and when it dried and when it went into the kiln, when I glazed it, it came out to be probably one of the most beautiful pieces I have ever made. And when I put it inside of the other sculpture, it looked like the actual flower that I based the design off. It was the middle of the flower, but in a different shape. It was beautiful, and I loved it. Years before, I was taking a watercolor class, and I was painting this big, beautiful angel because I was obsessed with angels. Weird. And I painted this beautiful archangel, and it was in space with rays coming out of her fingers into the globe down there. And it was a watercolor class. Keep this in mind. And what happens? I wanted to paint the space nice and just beautiful with stars, and my teacher says, Angel, put some purples and some red and some beautiful colors. And I said, no. I want space to be black, like in the movies, with little dots that remind me of stars. And she said, no, Angel, you're just not gonna do it. You're not permitted to do it. I said, what? I went to a store, I bought myself a small little bottle of Higgins Chinese ink. You probably know what that is. Chinese ink is permanent. And I painted the space, which is about 60% of the painting, pitch black. I did at least 3 layers. And then I brought it back. My teacher, as soon as she saw it, she said, Angel, are you serious? She took the watercolor and she brought it into the sink and she tried to wash it off, because you can do that with watercolor. How dare she? Took it and tried to wash it, and I'm over here like this. Ah, you lady. You can't wash that ink off. Ha ha! I won. And I sure did. And I remember I was quite satisfied at that painting. 2 different stories, 2 different pieces of art. One where I had to be pushed for the change that ended up being so beautiful, and one of the only sculptures that survived. Mom has it, of course. And then there's the angel, the one that reminds me that yes, I got my way, but what if? What if? 2 different examples. In today's gospel, yet another fishing story. I love the words of Simon Peter. I find them quite vulnerable. I say this because the words that he said to Jesus come with just a little bit of apprehension. Kind of like, really? After a long night of fishing, here comes this weird guy and tells you, and by the way, a carpenter. What's a carpenter doing giving fishing advice? But here he is, hey, why don't you just do it this way? And Peter just like pretty much says, sure. This is how I read it. Does it, and they are amazed. And they cast these beautiful nets, these circular nets, which is the reason why they have two boats, by the way. These nets are not really that easy to cast, and you have to do it correctly so you don't mess it up and maybe get all bundled, and then you can't fish anything. So it was a collective story. It's not just Simon Peter. So they do this, and then a bunch of fish, the story says. Boats almost did not make it because of the amount of fish. They were amazed. They were just witnessed a part of a miracle. They participated in a miracle. A beautiful thing. And then we have the very sweet reaction of Simon Peter has, go away from me. Which I took it as, that's quite dramatic. But then I said, well, it's really not dramatic. It's really a self-reflection, a self-awareness on the part of Peter, saying, darn it, look at what I've done. I should have known better. I do wonder what he was asking himself later on. I thought I knew how to fish. I thought I knew how the weather was supposed to be, how to cast these nets, but apparently I don't. And here comes Jesus and says these interesting words, now you're going to be catchers of men. Seriously, what does that mean? To catch men. So these fishermen were being called, not necessarily to change everything about themselves, but they were being called to modify their life vocation, their livelihood. A very dangerous thing, if you think about it. These were not words that were just gentle, oh, you're going to be catcher of men now, how sweet. No, there's more to it. Hey, I need for you to do this big, big change. So imagine having these words said to you, and you having to change all of this to then follow Jesus, not knowing what's going to happen. That uncertainty must have been very scary or nerve-wracking. But what's interesting about all of this, or at least a part of it, is that this happens to us on a daily basis. Surprise! When we think that we have something and we think that's the right way of doing it, here comes Jesus and just throws in a wrench and watches you. Like, what are you going to do with that? And there is something scary about it. There's something nerve-wracking about it. It's actually kind of messed up, in my opinion. But it's also quite beautiful, because it reminds us that the work has really nothing to do with us. And I remember the first time I heard those words, I got really upset. I'm like, what do you mean it has nothing to do with me? It has to do with me. No, it doesn't. The work is not our own. I'm going to call her Mother Florence. Is that okay with you? Good. Just easier for me. Mother Florence, in my opinion, is also an incredible example of vulnerability, of strength, especially during constant change. All the readings that I read about her was just change upon change upon change, and incredible danger. And the words that apparently she used many times was, I am but a worm, when people will give her credit for certain things. Imagine surviving labor camps, factories, political camps, serving in incredibly dangerous areas, and then finally moving to Canada and having your priesthood suppressed. Like, you've done such a great job after we used you. now you have to, you're not really a priest. Let us not forget the amount of verbal violence that she must have had received at the hands of the church, and the quantity of racism, sexism that she must have suffered, and at the same time maintaining humility and faith in casting those nets over and over again, every single time she was called to change at the cost of herself. Water yourself down to do the ministry so I can also feel safe. See, when we are open to the Spirit, adjustments come. It's just a part of it. It's a part of being a follower of Christ. Adjustment. Florence answered with a yes, even when faced with danger. Her life, at least what I have read, her life teaches us that God calls us in unique, in mysterious ways. And again, the word adjust. And no worries, I'm almost done. Now I assure you, if, and this is sad to say, if Mother Florence would have been ordained in the Episcopal Church today, she still will have suffered racism, sexism, mistreatment from those in leadership, lay and ordained, and dare I say, religious. But yes, as a church we have learned a lot, especially to pat ourselves on the back. We can say that we have listened to the Spirit, and we have. We really have. And every once in a while, when Jesus has said, hey, cast those nets, we've done it. We've paid for it dearly, but we've done it. We've cast those nets. We probably have messed it up while casting it. Haven't really fished that well, but we do it again. Just like Peter. Just like the men in both boats that took a chance after a long day of catching nothing. Nothing at all. So, as we continue with our respective callings, we will face moments again of vulnerability, especially when well-established routines and practices are shaken, and at times completely broken down. When in the privacy of our own hearts, we might say to ourselves, darn it, why does this hurt so much? Because it does. Why must we be this way? I have been faithful. Why does this happen to me? After all I have done. Then Jesus says again, in the middle of that pain, cast your net. But at times, and think about it as a car or a boat, we park our hearts deep in this grief and in pain, and we cover ourselves in mourning. It is difficult to listen when we already have decided what it is best for us instead of listening to the calling of the Spirit. To listen to the voice of the Spirit telling us it is time to go. It is time to go. Or your work here is done. Your new work awaits. Painful words. You are fishing for fish that is no longer there. Ooh. It takes vulnerability, courage to be transformed, maybe even a bit of foolishness. The focus should not be on the empty nets, but on the divine carpenter giving us fishing advice. We are being called to live dangerously. Heard that before. Like Mother Florence. She lived dangerously. Peter did. And so did Bishop Buddy. And so do you. As we leave this place and get back on the boat again, I encourage you, just cast the damn net. And it's gonna suck. And it's also gonna be beautiful. It really is. And you're going to be afraid. But alone, you are not. We must cast those nets in the storm or in the calm, and beware of the calm. The waters underneath can sweep you away. So my brothers, after a day of catching nothing, get on the boat, cast it in again, but this time, catch people. And don't worry about the nets. God will take care of it. Cast the net over and over again. Amen.
Amen.